This Wednesday morning, if you're just tuning in, this is the Situation Room, as we've had quite a number of conversations this morning, and then we're getting into maybe the second half of what started off a conversation that we had at 7 o'clock. But we're going to go into some of these deep issues this morning and allow us to then be able to do so. Our audience on KTN, thank you for keeping it here with us as we continue into these conversations this morning, and our live streams still are up on YouTube, Facebook, and on X. This is the Situation Room, and we get into conversations this hour, and you say, okay, what's the hullabaloo about? What is the issue? Well, we're going to hear the details of it this morning. Joining us in the hot seat today to then be able to look into conservation versus development. Where do you actually draw the line? Fighting for the park. Gov't is the board chairperson of the Green Belt Movement in one of the hot seats this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Delighted to be here.
Thank you for being here. Karibu Sana. And also the executive director of Just Act is Akshay Vishwanath. He's also here with us in the hot seat. Good morning.
Good morning, and pleasure to be here.
Thank you both for being here today, because we're going to have the old age conversation about what do you give up for the other. Do you say it's okay to develop at the expense of conserving what are natural habitats that you can also benefit from? So we're going to get into some sticky waters this morning, but we're going to do it because it's necessary. Before we do that, as you may know, Dennis goes around the African continent every week. He lands in a different African country. He comes back with their proverbs and chocolate. Guess which one you will have this morning?
Interpretation.
There you go.
Yes, chocolates. Monday, they're out. Nude as a thing. Yeah, but today we are in Guinea, yeah, and it's a rich country that has bauxite. Bauxite is used for the production of aluminium, but they also have oil, gold, and diamond. It's also considered to be pretty much the water tower of the western part of the continent. But let's get the proverb. When a mother has twins, she must sleep on her back. When a mother has twins, she must sleep on her back. Akshav, we start with you. How would you interpret it?
I guess it's a choice of where you show your love. As a mother, you might want to cuddle one if you had one child, but when you have two and they're sleeping on either side of you, you can't quite do that. So you end up sleeping on your back. So how do you share the love is how I would interpret that.
Yagodi, how would you interpret it?
Wow, I love Akshay's interpretation. I would say something similar, but it's also about where your heart is, right? And because your heart is facing up, you're not hiding it, and you're opening up. The mother is opening herself up, particularly because of essentially the double
Blessing.
What'd you say? Blessing. That's what it is. The double blessing, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well said, well interpreted, Asante Sana.
All right, so there is a question right now about countries wanting to move from one place to the next in terms of the development agenda. And can you do that at the expense of what would be conserving natural habitat that actually does a lot for you? The environmentalists and other folks who just care about a lot of these spaces, and for all of us who should, have said that, you can develop, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you protect certain spaces. Where are we now? I'll start with you, Nyagothie. Where are we? Because Monday we saw people being arrested because they said, you know what, we need to stop this thing where you want to put a road right through the middle of the park and you want to move animals in order to do that. Why would that make sense for anybody right now? And then what would be the argument against that?
So maybe let me back up a little bit and think about one of these. This question, and that even for this morning's conversation, where we are terming it as development versus conservation, and if I may, I'd like to suggest that I think it's actually a false choice that we're being asked to make.
It's an unfair choice.
It is not only unfair, but it is a false one.
Okay.
Right? Because I do not think that we necessarily have to say that the only way that we can advance and we can progress is, and by that I mean when we think about that, we think about the physical development, right? And the building of roads and infrastructure, that must come at the cost of the environment, and therefore we're being asked to make those choices. And I know Akshay has a lot to say on this because he's a member of the Friends of Nairobi National Park, and that's why we were out in support of them. We as Greenbelt were out in support of them this Monday. But I would say if you know, even for those of us who have had the great opportunity to travel outside Kenya, and some of it to our neighboring countries and some of it to these other countries, Singapore, for example, Europe and the US. I know frequently we have folks telling us about Hyde Park and Central Park. One of the things that we know is that in these countries, they are actually trying to reclaim infrastructure in order to turn it green. And these environments, particularly in cities, is where we see that there is a much healthier lifestyle in living standards for the residents in the cities. So what we do is we see development as including healthy, clean, natural environments. That is part of what development looks like. And it is not just about high-rise buildings and concrete floors and paved roads and sidewalks.
Yeah. Actually, when you look at conservation, especially, let's talk about Nairobi National Park, as it were. We have just been given an example of what other cities are doing to reclaim their position and go green, you know. That means that development and conservation can exist peacefully. So no one has to suffer in all this thing called development. But if that were to be taken away from the dwellers, the residents of Nairobi and Kenya, what would that mean and what would that look like in terms of quality of life that the residents have?
Right. I mean, even the fact that you mentioned the point, development and conservation in that way, again, points to the false choice that Nyaguti is mentioning. Because development is actually advancing on many different things at the same time. Development is just not a financial improvement, right? You wouldn't ever say, should we have development or freedom of the press? You wouldn't say, should we have development and human rights, right? Like, development is advancing human rights, in advancing rule of law, advancing the economic status, advancing the environmental status. That is development, when you do all of that together properly. Right, so this conversation about development versus conservation is actually a very false argument, and it's one perpetuated precisely to allow things like this to happen. What we should be asking is, like, as a city, for example, what is the optimal way we want to grow as a city so that, for example, it improves mobility? We have better mobility in this country. Do we have better recreational spaces and green spaces? And Nairobi National Park is one of those spaces, but it's not the only one, right? Yes, because it has a greater status as a national park, it's globally renowned, we have charismatic wildlife in it. Yes, it has a certain unique status, and it's very central to Nairobi's identity as a city. I don't think you see any advertising around Nairobi, whether it's starting from the airport, JKIA, to the city, Safaricom, whatever it is, you look at it, that imagery of Nairobi always has the Nairobi National Park in it. It's very central to identity. So it's an identity question, number one. But in terms of quality of life, I think the issue we have in Nairobi is we actually have a lot of green spaces, but they're so concentrated so that only a few elite enjoy them, right? You think of how many parts of Nairobi actually have no green space at all. There are other parts, even wealthy suburbs of Nairobi, that are green because that green exists on people's private property. Will you go to Runda? Do you go to Karen and see a public park there? You don't. So the idea that Nairobi is developing because we're constantly building, but what we're actually doing is reducing the public spaces and, more importantly, public goods in Nairobi across how we think development is happening. And that is what we should be talking about and against. Development is advancing on all fronts, including the environmental one. That collectively is development.
What would be the rationale of anybody putting up a monstrosity of a construction that just happened to go through one of these spaces? What would be the rationale behind that? And I'm not even playing devil's advocate. I'm saying, for those who are saying that this is the location where we would want to do this and would attribute it to development and saying that we need this to move people from point A to point B or move goods or whatever the case may be, what would be the rationale from your understanding of why they would choose to do this?
I mean, I can certainly say a little bit more about the work that we've been doing very vocally. And I think let me talk about Karura Forest because it is near and dear to our heart. And actually can say a little bit more about what could be the rationale for the construction that's being proposed at the national park. Let's just go back just a couple of years ago where the government announced that they wanted to excise 51.64 acres from Karura Forest for the expansion of Kiambu Road. So there is their answer, right? And any of us who have been on Kiambu Road in the morning or in the evening during rush hours, we know what that's like, right? And so it's reasonable. We say we've got to be able to find a way to get people to where they need to get in a way that's faster, more efficient, right? So one answer is let's expand the road. At Greenbelt and with some of our other partners, we said, let's think about what some of the options are when it comes to the expansion of the road. So first of all, we're saying you need to expand. What happened to the road reserve, right? You need to expand. Where has been the consultation in terms of ensuring that there's public participation from the interested stakeholders? That includes the Friends of Karura Forest, who are the CFA, co-managing the forest with Kenya Forest Services. What about what we've been promised time and time again of rapid bus transit, being able to provide a public transportation that is cleaner and greener, right? Where does that fit in? And when we presented these questions in court a year ago, the judge, Justice Omolo, sided with the argument that indeed, both because of procedural matters, and especially because of procedural matters, right, the government had not followed the regulation as was needed in order to be able to proceed with this excision, right? And that we cannot forget that is a requirement of our constitution and our laws, that when the government has a proposition to excise our forests and our natural resources for ostensibly the benefit of the public, then it needs to come and consult the public and confirm that. And so, yes, there are questions around how could we improve the standard of living, as Akshay was saying, of Kenyan citizens, of residents in Nairobi, by causing the least harm to the environment. This is the precautionary principle, right? Which is in our books, which is in our laws. And the government is required to observe the precautionary principle, which says if there is a real risk that there's going to be significant harm to the natural environment, then we are required to take the path of least harm.
Actually, Friends of Nairobi National Park, as we live at the moment, there has been extreme cases, rather enough cases we've had of human-wildlife conflict. And if you just speak to conservationists, they'll tell you it's because we have encroached on property that belongs to these animals. You know, you talk about animals being spotted in Rongai, it's because we have gotten into their spaces. Today let's talk about development as a holistic matter. You mentioned about roads. One would ask the question, even as we talk about accessing Nairobi National Park, why are we not looking at conserving this in matters of even vehicles accessing this park? Why don't you have them to be EVs, cleaner for the animals, cleaner for everybody who's getting in, so that when you talk about development, everybody is involved in this conversation. But even while at it, question is there, why are you given enough time for public participation so that as we are building whatever it is we want to build in that park, because we are not clear, maybe you can tell us what it is that we want to build. Was there participation for Nairobi residents, for Friends of Nairobi National Park, to give their views before that construction takes place?
Yeah. Specifically to that very question, no, there wasn't. Okay, KWS will say that yes, we had one public participation meeting. They sent out questionnaires, etc., to get inputs, etc. What we have to ask ourselves is two questions. Number one, did what they carry out meet the threshold set out by the Constitution and by the relevant laws? So basically, did you meet the criteria required for that public participation? They clearly did not, right? Saying you did one participation meeting is not what is in the laws. They had to have several such meetings. They had to have published the draft EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment Report. When they publish it, meaning publish it in a Gazette notice, so the whole public is aware that this document is out. They should be given 30 days to submit comments. After those 30 days of comments, a draft is redone. We should have had another set of public participation meetings on that draft, etc. None of that was done. In fact, the vast majority of this public participation exercise was done within their own staff. There was very little public awareness about such a project, almost no invitation to the main stakeholders to come into the public participation meetings. So basically, it was a very, I would say, lackluster and rigged kind of public participation in order to tick a box and say, yes, we got people to talk about this meeting, and 85% of the people supported it. But was it done with the right intent? Because the intent behind public participation in our laws and in our constitution is not to say we just gave you information and told you about it. It's actually to invite the quality inputs from the public, whether it's the general public or very direct and specific stakeholders who are concerned with that activity, to give real inputs, to get the best development outcomes you were asking about earlier in that project, right? So when you use public participation as a tick box, and you don't even meet the legal thresholds for that, you can't say you've done public participation. What you did was, perhaps at best, and I'm being very generous here, you've done public information sharing. That is different from public participation.
Actually, what has been constructed, or what are the proposals? Because we are having different versions.
Yes.
It is a hospital for the animals at the orphanage, or is it a car park?
Yeah.
Who's telling what? Who's telling the truth? What exactly has been constructed there?
It's actually both, right? So let's take a step back. What is an orphanage? Ideally, an orphanage is almost like a rehabilitation center. When you come across sick animals in the wild for whatever reason, naturally, or some harm has come to them, some illness, some whatever it is, they are brought to the orphanage and are meant to be treated, rehabilitated, and given back to the wild, rewilded. In some cases, the injury, the illness, or if it's like a young animal that's been abandoned by its mother, there's no real hope for rewild. Like, they would not survive in the wild. So then the orphanage becomes like their permanent home to live out the rest of their lives. But the primary goal is the treatment and giving them, putting them back in the wild, which is the hospital you're referring to. So yes, you have to have facilities to keep them, to house them for the period they're in the orphanage, and then you have to have all the medical facilities and care facilities. No one here on any side of this debate is arguing the need for that. We do need the orphanage for that purpose, rehabilitation, treatment, etc. The current facilities are not adequate and don't provide the animals the kind of welfare they need. No one's arguing about that. What we are arguing about is why this specific site within the Nairobi National Park was chosen for that. Why are we giving up space from prime natural wild habitat to create a facility for caged animals? You could meet these objectives of an orphanage by building it anywhere in the city, for that matter, anywhere in the country, without taking away from natural wild habitat in a gazetted protected area. That is what we're contesting. It's not about the orphanage. I think KWS is making a huge mistake by saying, we just want to improve the welfare of animals by building this. But the question is not, do we need that facility? Is where it's being built, why it's being built in that particular place, and how that decision was arrived at to build it there. Which comes to the second point, the parking lot. The parking lot is part of that development. But our contestation is actually, The reason they're building that parking lot is to serve the Bomas International Conference Center. But there's no way the government would come out and simply say that we are taking away land from this national park to build a parking lot for this other facility. So what they're doing is using the orphanage to say, oh, we're building this orphanage in this new site, which was never agreed on, with this parking lot, at a capacity that an orphanage does not require, because it serves the other project.
What's the capacity?
Yeah. So the siting, the location of this new orphanage and the size and scope at which it's being built serves a different agenda. And that is what we're trying to bring out to the public's attention. And we really hope that the public understand and follow that. And just if you allow me just to bring an analogy into this, you know, when you talk of the debates around this conservation, development, etc., we have to just think back to what happened with flooding in Nairobi. There are laws around riparian reserves, right? We never have a debate in public about should we, bend the rules a bit to build because it's conservation versus. We know we shouldn't be building on riparian for various reasons, lack of development controls, corruption, etc. That happens. But then what happens? We have a flood, right? It's the same thing with the national park. It's not a policy debate. When you set rules around a protected area, you're saying these are the boundaries of that protected area. It should be free from development, etc. You might have some spin-off activities that complement that status, so tourism, for example, visitation, etc. But you do not bend the rules and start building in there. That's the whole, I think with all these debates, that's the issue, right?
Yeah.
As a country, we have rules, we have laws, we have policies. Why don't we just follow that? These debates, these controversies come up because we're trying to bend the rules around these things. And that's why, for example, all these controversies, even what Nguthi has mentioned, when she talks about the judge siding and saying procedurally it was wrong. Why was it procedurally wrong? It's because we were not following the law. There was an intent not to follow the law. And if you had followed due procedure, there's no way you could have gone ahead with those projects.
Interesting. So the ministry, rather the KWS, the Kenya Wildlife Service, is under the Ministry of Wildlife and Tourism, right? Now, that ministry operates as a state corporation. Rather, KWS operates as a state corporation. So it's got its mandate, right? Its primary mandate is to conserve and manage wildlife in Kenya and enforce all related laws and regulations. It might also interest you to know that as of yesterday, you've just gotten a new PS in the name of Julius Bitoko, who was moved from education. He's the man now who's going to be operationalizing all of these things that we talk about. This issue of the parking and such. Jurisdiction, managing national parks and supervising wildlife management in reserves, private sanctuaries, and conservancies falls under this directly. Now, if this is the mandate of the larger body under which KWS falls, it would appear as though everything that you mentioned this morning is in direct contravention to the very thing that the ministry is supposed to be safeguarding. And so I would have to ask, even before we even talk about whether there was public participation or whether this car park is actually for the new Bomas Hotel and whose interests might lie therein, the very mandate of the ministry is being abrogated by these things that are happening. Why are we not met with surprise at that before we even start getting to all of these other details about a car park and whose it might be and whose interest it's serving?
Yeah.
The very fundamental operation of the ministry, this is going against it.
So if Nguthi, if you don't mind me answering that,
go
and
ahead.
I want to tie that question to what was asked earlier about like visitation and access and using cars, etc. I think even just the way that ministry is structured speaks a lot about how wildlife and conservation is thought of in this country, because it's in the Ministry of Wildlife and Tourism, right? And so it's seen as these entities are for tourism, and tourism understood as wealthy foreign tourists.
Yes.
Right? We're not seeing this as public goods. We're not seeing this as natural heritage, natural, not national, natural heritage that Kenyans should be facilitated to access and enjoy as best possible. right? So even when we look at like the entrance fee for the Nairobi National Park, just in the last year, increased, by a factor of like 3 almost, why are you making it more expensive for Kenyans to visit their natural heritage, right? And so when you ask that question of like this mandate of the ministry and KWS and these government institutions to safeguard and manage, and etc., they don't see it as safeguarding and managing. They're looking at it, how do we commercialize?
So they're getting it wrong from the get-go, is what you're saying.
I think from a policy perspective and a mindset perspective, we're getting it very, very wrong. And I think it's both a government policy issue. I also think it's from an industry issue, particularly the tourism industry, who see particularly these areas with charismatic wildlife that are a draw for international tourists as something that should be managed in a very elitist way so that richer, more influential people visit, but through those decisions to allow that, you're actually excluding the average Kenyan from being able to visit. As you've said, like we should be seeing a situation where a park like this in the middle of the city should have organized tour buses where anyone could just go at a nominal fee, get in, have a game drive in the park. But you have the government and the industry trying to lock it in to say, no, we should have these exclusive safaris with wealthy jeeps and et cetera. But this is not an argument you'd see in most other cities in the world. If you had Central Park, Hyde Park, whatever it is, it's free for, come in and enjoy it. It's your right to enjoy this. And I think that's what, from a policies perspective, a mindset perspective, from the government particularly and these government institutions, safeguard those resources, not develop them, safeguard them, manage them well, make sure Kenyans can access them as part of their natural heritage. Then you wouldn't even have this question of like, why are we creating these facilities so the vast majority of Kenyans can go into a built infrastructure environment when they could actually be going into the national park?
Gov't, what will it take for that mindset to change? Why do I say that? Because the fight to protect our environments did not start today. We know the story of Uhuru Park and the fight Wangari Maathai together with Kenyan women put up to say, we are going to protect this space. Today we're talking about Friends of Karura again, fighting to protect that space. Now we are at the national park. We'll not even talk about Masai Mara to begin with, because that's another fight altogether. What will it take for us to shift the mindset and look at the resources that we do have, not from a commercial perspective, but as a natural heritage that all of us have a piece of, that belongs to us, and we must protect it with our lives? Because we get rid of Nairobi National Park today. What are we saying? Because anytime you touch down, please go enjoy the only national park in the world within a capital city. But you're busy destroying them. What will it take for us to change that policy or to look at things differently?
Listen, Dennis, I think we have our answer, because when I look in the forestry space, which is a very particular segment, but also looking at the environment more broadly, we have the blueprint that we created over 20 years ago. So let's take a look at, there was the huge fight, as you were mentioning, Greenbelt has been around for nearly 50 years. And Professor Maathai, the founder of the organization, was very, very clear in terms of telling us, think about your rights to your environment and what you, as an individual, we started with the rural women, the barefoot foresters, right? In terms of thinking about their own environment, what does it take to protect their environment, and also directly to make sure that they're benefiting from the protection of the environment. So that link was made very clear. Then, after she became the Assistant Minister for the Environment, after the elections, when we had our new dispensation, and she was elected. This was in 2002. In 2002, when she was elected and appointed Assistant Minister for the Environment, there was a huge push to think about how do we, quote unquote, do forest protection, forest management, which led to the Forest Conservation and Management Act at that time. And then KFS was created to work with communities to protect the environment. This is not a competition, between the government which are the custodians of the natural environment, and the communities who, especially those who are adjacent to the forests, but not just them, all of us, as the Constitution says, we have an obligation in the Constitution as the citizens to support the government in the protection of our environment so that we can all achieve and attain the rights to a clean and healthy environment. Our values are there. We have them in the Constitution, right? So like Akshay was saying, is that what does it take now to ensure that we are realizing our right to a clean and healthy environment, that we are holding our government officials, both the elected ones and those in the public service, to meet and to implement the laws and regulations as they should be. So what it also takes is for us as Kenyans, one is a sense of an awareness, right, and an understanding, and two, to remember this conversation that we're having again today is coming back. This is what we were talking about 20, 25 years ago. So that means that we do not let our guard down. It doesn't mean we take anything for granted. It means that it is a recommitment of Kenyans every generation to ensure that we are talking about and investing in and committed to protecting our environment, because we both believe that this is a right for all of us and that it is also an obligation to protect our environment, not just for us, but for our children and their grandchildren and their grandchildren.
Can I add something to that? I mean, I think the what happened in Karura Forest, not the recent tree nursery development controversy, but the previous one, the takeover from Friends of Karura Forest of the management of the forest. When you look at it, the root of that was the resources coming in, right? People paying their entrance fee and coming in, and who has control of that? Of course, there are accusations that, money was not managed properly, etc., etc. But when I look at that and I realize, if a government was keen on safeguarding, managing these natural resources and having them protected for Kenyans, then would the government say, actually, we're taking over because we feel Kenyans should not be paying for this? We want to use taxpayer money to maintain this forest and make sure Kenyans get in free. They didn't do that. They took over because they saw money was coming in. If Karura Forest was as it was 20, 25 years ago and no one was visiting, would the government have done a takeover and said, we want to manage this and make it better for Kenyans, So that's, you understand the thinking behind that. It's not about service delivery to Kenyans. It's not about improving their quality of life. It's control over resources and how those opportunities are created for a few people.
Okay, so there's a mandate. There are obviously things that are going. There are people who are protesting, but the thing is going on. So it's clear that whatever is being said is not being adhered to, but that there's an umbrella understanding that these spaces need to be protected, but they're not being protected. So what are we really doing? That's the nitty-gritty here. That we have conversations, people protest and get arrested, but that it still continues as though those things never happened. So we're staring at impunity. That's very clear. So then the question becomes, what then must be done next? From where you sit, from both of you, start with you, Gov't, what needs to be done? Because the construction did not stop on Monday evening. If we wake up this morning and we go and see, it still continues. There are still people signing checks, there are still people doing things, and that those spaces continue to whittle away. So what needs to be done? Because it's going to be Cement City in a minute.
Right. I mean, what a horrific picture you've painted there.
Sad but true.
Right? And can you imagine us living in Nairobi the way it is? And essentially, if you are fortunate enough to live in certain neighborhoods, that is the only respite that you get. So here's the thing. Kenyans have shown that they do not give up. right? We have seen a commitment from Kenyans time and time again to come back and demand from the duty bearers, from the government, to deliver what is owed to us. The other thing that we have also seen very clearly is that the battles are not won in a day, and they're not won against only one person. We can go back to, let's go back to the Uhuru Park, and that you talked about it in 1989. Remember, we did not even have the law on our side. Back then, you could not sue the government to protect the environment as an individual, but there was a real effort in terms of ensuring that the public understood what was at stake, right? And then to provide opportunities for the public to engage. And then thirdly, to think about who else has interests here, that either they're unaware, they don't understand what's going on, or they need to be convinced in order to pull their support, right? That successfully happened in the struggle for Uhuru Park in 1989. In 1999, we saw something similar for Karura Forest, and we've seen that time and time again around the country. So what's really important is to ensure that we do not feel as though that we will give up, even though right now the laws that you're talking about there's real impunity here that we have seen. We are seeing, as we know, that there's a conversation about what is happening in Imenti. What in the world are we thinking about? Of saying that we're going to, without the requisite public participation, excise 200 acres for essentially luxury private developments that the majority of Meru residents and certainly Kenyan citizens will never see the inside of, right? For these vanity projects, in essence. We have just seen pictures last week of it. Apparently, it looks like there are new intentions for Uhuru Park, right? And this is what we're hearing about. So I think what's really important is we must recall that because of our values, because we believe in our right to a clean and healthy environment, because we believe in holding our governments accountable for what they owe to us, that this is not a fight that we're going to give up on. Our ancestors, when they were struggling for independence against the empire where the sun never set, did not believe, did not participate because they were sure that they were going to win, right? There was no guarantee that they were going to win, but they knew they had to because that was the right thing. That is what we do. I think someone called us activists as though it was a slur the other day, and I will say I am very proud to be called one, because those are those of us who are advocating for a vision of a country that is fair, that is just, and where we truly are able to realize the promise of our constitution.
Okay, similarly, everybody understands the importance of these spaces that we do have. You know, if you go to Maasai, they will tell you, we live well with these animals, protect this space, you know. You come to Nairobi, friends of Nairobi National Park will tell you, we'll have this space and we're going to fight, protect it. Go to Karura, it is the same story. But similarly, those who have been given the mandate, those who have the machinery from the government to protect these spaces, seemingly do not see the value in it. Because you talk about the Maasai National Park, and one would look at that and how KWS gave the approvals for the construction of that hotel there, and one asked the question, as the person who's been given the power to protect that space, what are you doing? You come to Nairobi National Park. Again, look at the kind of public participation that you're talking about. Those with the mandate to do that are failing.
Yes.
Is that the weakest link in this fight in protecting our spaces?
Yes, I would say so. In the sense that, first, it's an understanding of a mandate, but also understanding why you have that mandate, right? They don't seem to understand that. They don't seem to appreciate their mandate in this. In fact, if anything, it seems that many of these institutions are headed by individuals who want to rubber stamp anything that comes from the executive, right? They don't understand their job is actually to be the counterbalance to some of those political decisions and say, oh, I am in charge of natural resources or a national park or a forest. And if a decision or a proposal even, let's not even say a decision, a proposal comes my way, I have to look at what the mandate is of my office, of my institution, and say, in the interests of that mandate, how do I respond to this proposal? And so even if it's coming from the highest levels of government, they should be that stop and say, hey, actually, the laws say this, and therefore this proposal can't work. Or if it's legally okay, policy-wise, is it still the right decision to be made? What we have in Kenya is these government institutions are not being the counterbalance to these issues. They're being the rubber stampers to these issues. So they're not carrying out their mandate. And I think part of the reason of that is beyond the politics and political survival for a lot of these individuals heading these institutions, is that I think there's a general mindset in government that public land, whether it's forests, national parks, etc., belong to the government. And what they don't realize is when we talk of public land and natural resources, those institutions manage those resources on behalf of the Kenyan public. And they need to be accountable and transparent to the people of Kenya around how they use those resources, how they manage them, how they protect them, and how they develop them. That understanding is completely missing. And I think that is why you see such a almost fictional attempt to engage in public participation and come up with these proposals, because they don't understand that. This is not their property. It's the property of the people of Kenya, and they have a mandate to be accountable and transparent to the people of Kenya on how they carry out their roles with respect to those resources.
What's going to move this needle? Because you could argue that you could spend all your time, we could all, have spaces whereby we speak about such things. There can be public engagements, people can come and have debates and share. But without the fundamental mind shift, that some of these things will not happen. And so many say the mind shift may not take place. So what you need to do is remove the person. And this is now where politics plays with some of these policies in the same space. So can we tie some of these things to then the importance of who you put in positions of leadership when it then comes to other issues and how they play out? That when you're at the ballot, you're not necessarily thinking, okay, so what I'm voting for is to make sure that the person who is sitting there is going to make sure that there's no park that's built in the middle of... You're not thinking that when you're voting. What you should be thinking is, whom am I going to vote for that is going to ensure everything constitutionally is going to go alongside sovereignty of the people, protection of the people, securing of livelihoods and anything attached to that. So how do we combine these things to work in the same space, whereby you realize that none of these things operate in isolation? Yeah, Gov't.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an important point, and we actually do see that in our world, right? And I will, I'm not sure how many people remember this, but when we had the campaigns to educate before we passed the 2010 Constitution, there was a lot of activity from civil society, and us as Greenbelt were very, very active in actually going out amongst the communities that we worked with to try and explain what this Constitution was about, how important it was that the chapters within the Constitution that were directly and also indirectly connected to our interests were there, to explain why that mattered. So when the referendum came, right, our Constitution passed. It wasn't 100%, but it was a very clear, distinct majority, because that Constitution, our Constitution, reflected the will of the people. Now, absolutely correct that there is a connection with who we have three arms of government, right? We have the executive, we have the National Assembly, our elected officials, and we also have the judiciary, right? And we have this similarly replicated at the county level. What is so important, and this is some of the work that we're doing both at GBM and also at the Wangari Maathai Foundation, is that we are ensuring that we're helping educate the next generation of leaders, right? Because there's a legacy from our founder with the values that she truly believed in, that were the foundation of her work, which reflected as well into the different avenues that she engaged in professionally, which included running, right? And she ran for election and lost, in one, right? And that's because we believe that you need to have the right people in place. Yeah, we need to make sure we elect them. And how do we do that? Part of this is ensuring that that we do not shy away from electoral politics. I remember when Professor Muthai first started talking about running for office, and several of us were like, oh, but that's, what do we say about politics? Politics is dirty. Why would you want to get involved in that when you're so pristine? We need to move away from that, yeah? Politics is what we make of it. We cannot always complain that the right people are not in place. And so it also means that we have to do a lot of education and informing what our key issues are. We have that. In many ways, we're a young democracy, right? So we've come a really long way in terms of the advancements we've made, but we still have a ways to go. Which means that when we we're encouraging our young folks to run for office, we're also tooling them, we're also preparing them in order to, once they reach these positions, whether it's at the county level or at the national level, they truly are able to engage from a point of knowledge with the issues. Thirdly, we will become, hopefully, countries where our parties are driven by ideology and not by party, right? And so that's what we are looking for.
Ashay, I want to look at it from, when you look at on all these resources that we do have, it's Kenyans, us, who live around them. Therefore, we ought to be the primary protectors of the same, together with the agencies that have been given the mandate to protect them. Then one ask the question, with everything that is happening around, have we been outmaneuvered? Have we let our guard down? Or have we been let down by those who've been given those powers? And that notwithstanding then, with what Nyagudi is saying, we cannot afford not to let our environment not be part and parcel of conversations whenever we get into political silly season. Because if someone comes to vie, say, in next to Karura Forest, then questions would be, what is your plan around protecting our space? Anyone coming to Langata or Karen constituencies, what should be the plan? Because then the people should form the agenda for them around resources that we own. Do you reckon that would, in one way or the other, contribute in the overall change on how we look at these resources?
Exactly. The first answer to your question is yes, we've been let down.
Okay.
We've been let down, for sure. But we are only let down when you talk of specific instances like what's happening in Nairobi National Park and what's happening in Karura, etc. But when you put it all together, not only are we being let down, but we allow ourselves to be let down.
Okay.
All right. And that has to shift. So when people use the term activists and stuff as a slur, actually I would say all Kenyans need to be full-time activists.
Okay.
It is our civic duty to be full-time activists. You don't have to fight every single issue because, we're human, we have only certain bandwidth, but you'll have things that concern you, right? So you might have, as a parent, you would have concerns around education, because your kids are going through the education system, and a broken education system does not help those kids, doesn't help that household, doesn't help the society, right? That might be an issue you fight in, but you put yourself all in. I think what we have a challenge here is two things. One is, you talked about elections and how you choose someone. That's just one part of that whole system, right?
Yep.
The day you choose someone, you have every right to choose someone who feel will best further your interests, whatever it might be, right? Once they get the job, how do you make sure they do their job? That's where we fall short. And that means, being informed about what's happening. So, these conversations is not just us having conversations, because a topic flared up on Monday.
No.
It's people should be aware, hey, the people with these mandates, the people who make decisions, the lawmakers are going on this trajectory, and I should be informed about what's happening so that I convert that knowledge and hopefully public anger into political pressure to get the right things done. Right? And you would find many ways to do that. Everything from a simple action as sharing information from your phone on social media, to writing your thoughts about it, to influencing a circle of friends or family you have around you. You can start from the very basics, and of course you can go right to the top where you're managing a stakeholder group like Friends of Nairobi National Park, managing institutions like Greenbelt Movement or Just Act or whatever it is. You find ways to exercise your rights as an active citizen, be that full-time activist. That is actually our role and our duty as Kenyans. And so when we see bad decisions being made like this, we should take action. And to your earlier question, you were asking like, yeah, we did the protest, it's impunity, they're still constructing. It's because we have to move from just the conversation and highlighting to issue. What are the tangible routes we're taking to have political pressure and action? So, for example, the Bomas International Conference Center itself has been flagged as illegally procured by the Auditor General. This was months ago.
Yeah.
You ask yourself, why aren't the
The
lawmakers...
declaration is by the Auditor General
Yes.
and not the acquisition by the... Okay.
No, the Auditor General said the way this conference center was procured in terms of like the contracts for construction and how it was developed, the whole idea around it was illegally done.
Yes.
It did not follow certain rules around financial management in this country. If that project is the one leading to this car park in Nairobi National Park, the question is, you see how everything suddenly becomes interrelated. Conservation is not, the issues in conservation are not for conservation alone. They're tied to the broader political challenges, governance challenges in this country. And so you have to target everything in that holistic way. So when you now talk about how do we tackle this issue because there's political pressure, you start asking the questions. The Auditor General flagged this. The Parliamentary Committee on Finance and etc., why did they not take it up and question this project? How are we allowing one illegality to lead to another illegality, which is then taking away our natural heritage in Nairobi National Park?
Indeed.
Right? The same way, some of those decisions take away freedom of press, freedom of speech, other human rights,
Freedom of assembly.
freedom of assembly, other economic rights, the corruption, all of that. It's all tied together. So we need to first be informed as people, convert that public knowledge into action, hold our lawmakers to account, not just the guy at the top. Why is your MP not saying something about this? Why, et cetera, your MCA, whatever. We have to go to the court and ask the courts, hey, this is the law. The mandate of the court is to ensure the law is followed and our rights are protected. So we need to present the legal arguments around this and say, okay, can the court pronounce itself of whether this is legal or illegal? And if it's illegal, it's stopped completely.
Yeah.
Remember, you only need one illegality to stop something.
Indeed.
Exactly. So you don't have to have a whole raft of things. If they've procedurally not done something even on one aspect, this project should be put to a halt. We have to put public and political pressure. So how do we petition the Senate, etc., to look into these issues and ask these questions and make sure the government is held to account? And by that way, the people are holding government to account.
It takes a collective conversation, but then engagement across board for everybody. And that's why important that we talk about these things. Our time has come to an end this morning, but that we were able to look into the depth of this matter and that we won't stop until the needle is moved. Thank you both for joining us in this conversation. Nyagothie Shege is the board chairperson of the Greenbelt Movement. Ash K. Vishwanath is the executive director of I beg your pardon, the executive director of Just Act, and have both joined us this morning. Thank you for being part of this conversation with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Asante sana. Good morning, everybody. At 10:01 o'clock, thank you for being part of the Situation Room this morning as we went into these conversations necessary for us to continue them as we do every morning. Good morning. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Talk again tomorrow, God willing. Good morning.
More of the classics and the hits you